They spent Thanksgiving destroying me for flipping burgers for losers instead of getting a real job, like my MBA cousins. Then the doorbell rang and my business partner introduced himself as a billionaire CEO who just awarded our little food truck a $50 million contract. My family's faces went white and I've never felt more satisfied in my life. Well, let me tell you about the Thanksgiving that changed everything. My name is Emily Williams and I'm 28 years old. 6 months ago, I thought my world was ending when Pinnacle Financial laid me off along with 300 other employees. I had worked there for 5 years, climbing the corporate ladder, wearing those suffocating blazers, and pretending to care about quarterly reports that meant nothing to real people. That's when I met Brandon at a networking event for displaced professionals. He was this quiet, thoughtful guy who talked about food with the same passion most people reserved for their children. Food brings people together, he'd say, his eyes lighting up. It tells stories. We bonded over our shared dream of starting something meaningful, something that mattered. So we pooled our savings, my measly severance package and his small inheritance from his grandmother, and bought a used food truck. Soul Kitchen on Wheels, we called it. Brandon had this incredible gift for fusion cuisine, blending his grandmother's southern recipes with international flavors he'd learned during his years studying abroad. The first month was brutal. 12-hour days, burns from the grill, dealing with health inspectors who seemed determined to shut us down. But slowly we built a following. Office workers started lining up for Brandon's Korean barbecue mac and cheese. Food bloggers began posting about our jerk chicken tacos. My family, however, saw none of this. They only saw failure. They saw their college-educated daughter flipping burgers, instead of climbing corporate ladders. Today was going to be the worst Thanksgiving of my life, and I had no idea it would also become the most satisfying. I parked outside my childhood home, staring at the familiar brick facade that once meant comfort but now felt like walking into a courtroom where I was already found guilty. The driveway was packed with luxury cars, my cousin Jasmine's new BMW, Uncle Raymond's Mercedes, Aunt Gloria's Lexus. My beat-up Honda Civic looked like it was auditioning for a demolition derby. Inside, the house buzzed with that particular energy of successful Black professionals showing off. Designer handbags strategically placed on counters, expensive watches catching the light, conversations peppered with corporate jargon and salary figures disguised as casual mentions. Well, look who finally showed up, Uncle Raymond announced as I walked in, his voice carrying that tone he reserved for disappointments. He was my father's older brother, the family success story, senior partner at a prestigious law firm, house in the suburbs, kids at Ivy League schools. Hey, Uncle Ray, I managed, setting down the sweet potato pie I'd made from scratch at 4 a.m. after closing the truck. Store-bought? Aunt Gloria asked, lifting the foil like she was investigating a crime scene. She was Mom's sister, a real estate mogul who never let anyone forget she'd made her first million before 40. No, I made it myself. How sweet. I guess you have time for baking now that you're between opportunities. The way she said it made unemployment sound like a communicable disease. Cousin Jasmine, fresh from her promotion to marketing director, swept over in her designer dress. Emily, still playing with that little food cart. She laughed, a sound like breaking glass. When are you going to get serious about your career? I felt the familiar knot forming in my stomach, the one that had been my constant companion since I started this venture. Dinner hadn't even started and I was already being dissected. The family gathered in the living room, drinks in hand, and somehow I became the evening's entertainment. It felt like being back in elementary school surrounded by bullies on the playground. So Emily, Uncle Raymond began, settling into Dad's old recliner like he owned the place. How long are you planning to keep this hobby going? It's not a hobby. It's a business. Cousin Michael, the MBA golden boy, nearly choked on his wine. Come on, cuz. A food truck? That's not a business plan, that's a midlife crisis. At 26, he was already a consultant at McKinsey, and he never let anyone forget it. We're profitable, I said quietly, but the room erupted in laughter like I'd told the world's funniest joke. Profitable? Jasmine wiped tears from her eyes. Girl, making enough to pay for gas doesn't mean you're profitable. Do you have health insurance? A 401k? Stock options? My mother sat in the corner, nursing her wine, saying nothing. The woman who used to brag about my good grades, my college acceptance, my first corporate job, now she couldn't even look at me. I mean, I get it. Aunt Gloria continued, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Sometimes we need to go through these phases. Remember when I thought I wanted to be an artist? Thank God my parents talked sense into me. This isn't a phase dash. Emily, sweetheart, Uncle Raymond interrupted, using that condescending tone he probably used with junior associates. You're 28 years old. Your cousins are buying houses, getting promotions, building real careers. When are you going to get a real job like your successful cousins? The words hit like a physical blow. The interrogation continued through dinner preparation. Every chopped onion, every stirred pot became an opportunity for another dig. I tried to help in the kitchen, desperate for something to do with my hands, but even that became ammunition. Oh, Emily's helping cook, Jasmine announced to the room. Getting practice for the food truck. More laughter like hyenas circling wounded prey. You know, Aunt Gloria said, pulling me aside while everyone else debated football. I've been thinking about you a lot lately. My friend Patricia runs HR at a really good company. I could make a call, get you an interview. Something respectable. I appreciate that, but I'm happy where I am. She looked at me with the kind of pity usually reserved for stray animals. Honey, pride is a luxury you can't afford right now. You're flipping burgers for losers instead of using that expensive education. The words stung because part of me had wondered the same thing during those first brutal weeks. Had I made a terrible mistake? Was I wasting my degree, my potential? It's not just flipping burgers, I said, but my voice sounded weak even to me. Of course not, sweetie. She patted my arm like I was a confused child. But let's be honest, this isn't what your parents dreamed of when they put you through college. I glanced at my mother, hoping for support for anything. But she was deep in conversation with my successful cousins, probably trying to deflect attention from her disappointing daughter. My phone buzzed. Brandon, how's it going? Need an extraction? Before I could respond, Uncle Raymond's booming voice called everyone to dinner. Come on, family. Time to give thanks for all our blessings. I wondered if I'd make the list. The dining room table groaned under the weight of tradition: turkey, stuffing, cranberry sauce, green bean casserole. But the real feast was my public humiliation, served with all the fixings. Let's go around the table and share what we're grateful for, Mom suggested, finally speaking directly to the group. She started with the cousins, of course. Jasmine was grateful for her promotion. Michael was grateful for his new client acquisition. Even the teenagers got praise for their good grades and college prospects. When it reached me, the table fell silent with anticipation. I'm grateful for the opportunity to build something meaningful with my own hands. How precious, Aunt Gloria whispered to her husband, loud enough for everyone to hear. Uncle Raymond cleared his throat. Speaking of building things, Michael just closed a deal that'll bring in $2 million for his firm. $2 million, Emily. That's real success. And Jasmine's company is sending her to London for that international marketing conference, Mom added, her voice bright with pride she'd never shown for my truck. The comparisons came fast and brutal. Cousin David's law school graduation. Cousin Tiffany's engagement to a doctor. Even my teenage nephew's acceptance to a prestigious summer program. Everyone was doing something important, something worthy of respect. What about you, Emily? Uncle Raymond asked with false innocence. Any exciting developments in the food service industry? The way he said food service made it sound like I was scraping gum off restaurant floors. Actually, yes. We just catered a wedding last weekend, and the bride said it was the best food she'd ever dash. A wedding? Jasmine clapped her hands mockingly. How charming. Was it in someone's backyard? The laughter that followed felt like being buried alive. I have an announcement, Aunt Gloria said, standing up with her wine glass raised. The room fell silent, expecting some toast or family news. Instead, she looked directly at me with a smile that could cut glass. I want everyone to know that my friend Patricia, you remember Patricia, she's the HR director at Morrison Industries, she's offered to interview Emily for a position in their accounting department. Entry level, of course, but it's a real company with real benefits. The table erupted in applause like she'd just announced the cure for cancer. Isn't that wonderful? Mom said, speaking directly to me for the first time all evening. A real opportunity. I don't want an accounting job, I said quietly. Want? Uncle Raymond laughed. Sweetheart, at your age with your track record, you don't get to want things. You get to be grateful for opportunities. My track record? I was never fired from Pinnacle. I was laid off with 300 other people. And then you chose to play with a food truck instead of looking for real work, Jasmine added. That's the track record. My face burned with shame and rage. These people who were supposed to love me, support me, had turned me into their evening's entertainment. I looked around the table at my cousins scrolling their phones, bored with the show, at my mother avoiding eye contact, at my aunt and uncle practically glowing with satisfaction. You know what? I started to stand. Maybe I should just dash. Sit down, Emily, Mom said sharply. Don't make a scene. So I sat, like a good little disappointment, and listened to them spend the next 20 minutes discussing my cousin's achievements while I became invisible again. That's when Aunt Gloria delivered the final blow. Aunt Gloria's phone rang during dessert, and she answered it right there at the table, something she'd never tolerate from anyone else. Patricia. Perfect timing, we're all here together. My stomach dropped as I realized what was happening. Yes, she's right here. Our little entrepreneur. She laughed, a sound like nails on chalkboard. Oh, you want to know about her business experience? Well, she runs a food truck with some partner. You know, flipping burgers, making tacos. More laughter from her end of the conversation. I sat frozen as she described my life to her friend like I was some charity case, some family embarrassment they were trying to rehabilitate. Patricia, meet the family disappointment, she said, holding out the phone toward me. The one who couldn't hold down a corporate job like her MBA siblings. The words hung in the air like smoke from a house fire. Family disappointment. The phrase I'd been afraid they all thought but never said out loud. Now it was official. Uncle Raymond was nodding along. That's exactly what I told her. She needs to get serious about her life. Emily. Patricia's voice crackled through the speakerphone. Your aunt tells me you've been having some challenges finding your footing in the professional world. Challenges finding my footing. Like I was a confused toddler learning to walk. I looked at my mother, desperate for her to say something, anything. To defend me, to tell them I was smart and capable and working 18-hour days to build something real. Dad, she just sat there. Silent. Letting them destroy what was left of my self-esteem over turkey and stuffing. I started, then stopped. What was the point? They'd already decided who I was, what I was worth. That's when I made the decision to leave. I was about to push back from the table, about to grab my coat and walk out of that house and maybe never come back when the doorbell rang. The doorbell's chime cut through the tension like a knife. Everyone froze, forks halfway to mouths, as if we'd all been caught doing something we shouldn't. I'll get it, Mom said, but Uncle Raymond was already standing. Expecting someone else? He asked, checking his watch. It was nearly 8 p.m., well past the acceptable time for surprise visitors on Thanksgiving. Through the front window, I could see a black town car idling in the driveway, its engine purring like a contented cat. Not a taxi or rideshare, something much more expensive. Emily, a familiar voice called from the foyer. Sorry I'm late. My heart stopped. That was Brandon's voice, but different somehow. More confident, more authoritative. The footsteps approaching the dining room weren't the shuffling gait of my food truck partner in his usual jeans and sneakers. These were the measured steps of someone who owned every room he entered. When Brandon appeared in the doorway, I barely recognized him. Gone were the casual clothes and easy smile I knew so well. Instead, he wore a charcoal gray suit that probably cost more than my car, Italian leather shoes that gleamed under the chandelier light, and a confidence that seemed to radiate from his very being. But what really caught my attention was the briefcase in his hand, expensive leather, the kind you see in movies about corporate takeovers. Brandon. I whispered, unable to process what I was seeing. He smiled at me, then turned to address the room full of slack-jawed relatives. Good evening, everyone. I apologize for interrupting your family dinner. Uncle Raymond, never one to miss an opportunity to assert dominance, stepped forward. And you are Brandon Williams, he said, extending his hand with the casual authority of someone used to being the most important person in any room. CEO of Williams Enterprise. The name hit the room like a physical force. The silence in that dining room was deafening. Uncle Raymond's hand hung in the air for a moment before Brandon shook it, and I watched my uncle's face cycle through confusion, recognition, and something that might have been fear. Williams Enterprise. I'd heard that name before, seen it in business magazines, financial news. They were huge, international huge. $1 billion huge. Williams Enterprise? Aunt Gloria's voice cracked slightly. The Williams Enterprise? The very same, Brandon said pleasantly, like he was discussing the weather. He moved through the room with the fluid grace of someone who'd attended 1,000 corporate dinners, shaking hands, making polite conversation, remembering everyone's names after hearing them just once. But how was this possible? The Brandon I knew lived in a modest apartment, drove a 10-year-old Honda, spent his evenings perfecting sauce recipes in our food truck kitchen. This man in the $1,000 suit was a stranger wearing my business partner's face. "I'm sorry I'm late, partner," he said, turning to me with that familiar warm smile. "I had to fly in from Dubai. Board meeting ran long." "Partner." He called me partner in front of my family, his voice carrying the kind of respect they'd never shown me. "Brandon," I managed, my voice barely above a whisper. "What are you doing here?" "Well, I couldn't miss Thanksgiving with your family," he said, then addressed the room again. "Emily's told me so much about all of you. The successful lawyer, the real estate mogul, the MBA consultant. Very impressive family." Cousin Michael practically preened. "Thank you, sir. We've all worked very hard to get where we are." "I'm sure you have," Brandon replied diplomatically. "Hard work is admirable. Speaking of which, I hope you don't mind me stealing your daughter away for a moment, Mrs. Johnson. We have some business to discuss." "Business? With the CEO of a billion-dollar company?" My family looked at me like I'd suddenly grown a second head. Brandon reached into his briefcase and pulled out a folder thick with official-looking documents. The kind of folder that meant serious money was about to change hands. "Emily, I have some news that couldn't wait until Monday," he said, his voice taking on that crisp, executive tone I'd never heard before. "Williams Enterprise has been conducting a comprehensive review of potential catering partners for our corporate events division." My family leaned forward like he was about to reveal state secrets. "After extensive market research and taste testing, our board has unanimously voted to award the exclusive catering contract to Soul Kitchen on Wheels." The words hung in the air like Christmas ornaments, beautiful and impossible. "Contract?" I whispered. $50 million over 3 years, Brandon continued matter-of-factly. "We're talking about catering for our international conferences, board meetings, client entertainment, product launches. The works. $50 million. I watched my cousin Michael's wine glass slip from his fingers, red liquid spreading across Mom's white tablecloth like spilled blood. 50. Uncle Raymond's voice died in his throat. "Million," Brandon finished helpfully. "We'll be handling events in 12 countries, feeding everyone from entry-level employees to heads of state. Your little food truck," he smiled at me, "is about to become a global operation." Aunt Gloria made a sound like air leaking from a balloon. "But that's not even the best part," Brandon continued, reaching back into his briefcase. "Since we'll need you to scale up operations immediately, the board approved an advance payment to get started." He pulled out a check and handed it to me. My hands trembled as I looked at the numbers. $500,000. "Consider it a signing bonus," Brandon said. "We'll need you to hire staff, purchase additional trucks, maybe look into some brick-and-mortar locations. This is just the beginning, partner." The entire room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop in Alaska. I stared at the check in my hands, my vision blurring with tears I refused to let fall. $500,000. More money than my entire extended family probably had in their checking accounts combined. "Brandon, I don't understand," I whispered. He sat down next to me, his expression softening into something more familiar. "Remember when I told you about my grandmother? How she taught me to cook, how she always said food was love made visible." I nodded, still in shock. "What I didn't tell you was that she was Evelyn Williams. As in Williams Enterprise founder Evelyn Williams. When she passed, she left everything to me, but I was supposed to be in Paris finishing my culinary degree. I hired managers to run the company while I figured out what I really wanted to do with my life." The room was so quiet I could hear my own heartbeat. "Then I met this incredible woman at a networking event," he continued, looking directly at me. "Someone who'd lost her corporate job but wasn't bitter about it. Someone who wanted to build something meaningful instead of just making money. Someone who reminded me why I fell in love with cooking in the first place." Uncle Raymond's face had gone completely white. Aunt Gloria looked like she might faint. "So I've been working both sides," Brandon explained. CEO by day, food truck partner by night. Waiting for the right moment to merge my two worlds. And after tasting what we've built together, after seeing how hard you work, how much you care about every single customer, well, the board meeting was just a formality. He stood up, straightening his tie. Ladies and gentlemen, meet my business partner. The woman who's about to revolutionize corporate catering across 3 continents. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours. Then Uncle Raymond started choking on his wine. Uncle Raymond's coughing fit seemed to break the spell. Suddenly everyone was talking at once, a cacophony of stammered apologies and desperate backtracking. "Emily, sweetheart," Aunt Gloria rushed over, her voice dripping with the honey she'd forgotten to use earlier. "I hope you know I was just joking about that accounting position. I always believed in your entrepreneurial spirit." "Absolutely," Uncle Raymond managed between coughs. "We were just testing your resolve, making sure you were really committed to your dream." Cousin Jasmine was frantically Googling Williams Enterprise on her phone, her eyes growing wider with each search result. "Holy shit," she whispered, then caught herself. Holy cow. "Brandon, you're really the CEO." "Guilty as charged," Brandon replied with that easy smile. "Though I prefer to think of myself as Emily's partner first, CO second." Mom finally found her voice. "Emily, honey, I had no idea you were working with such important people." She turned to Brandon with that fake smile she used for church ladies she didn't like. "Mr. Williams, we're so honored to have you in our home." "The honor is mine," Brandon replied politely. "Emily speaks about her family constantly. How proud you all are of her courage in starting her own business, how supportive you've been during the challenging early days." I almost choked on my wine. Supportive was definitely not the word I would have used. "We've always encouraged her independence," Mom said, rewriting history in real time. "Haven't we, Raymond?" "Oh yes," Uncle Raymond nodded vigorously. "Always knew she had the entrepreneurial gene. Takes after her uncle, you know. I've always been a risk taker myself." The hypocrisy was breathtaking. These same people who'd spent the evening destroying my self-esteem were now trying to take credit for my success. But Brandon wasn't done yet. "You know," Brandon said, settling back into his chair like he planned to stay a while, "Emily was just telling me how nervous she was about tonight. She said her family had some concerns about her career choices." The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. "Concerns?" Aunt Gloria's laugh sounded like breaking glass. "Oh no, we've always been her biggest supporters." "Really?" Brandon's eyebrows rose slightly. "Because she mentioned something about being called the family disappointment? And someone asking when she'd get a real job?" You could have heard a mouse sneeze. "I think there's been a misunderstanding," Uncle Raymond said quickly. "We were just concerned about her financial security, you understand. Family looking out for family." Brandon nodded thoughtfully. "Of course. Family support is so important, especially when someone's building something from the ground up. The restaurant industry has a 90% failure rate, you know. It takes real courage to risk everything on a dream." He looked around the table, meeting each person's eyes. Emily could have taken any number of corporate jobs after the layoffs. She had headhunters calling, offers from Fortune 500 companies. But she chose to bet on herself instead. "That's the kind of person I want as a partner." The lies my family had been preparing died on their tongues. "Now," Brandon stood up, checking his expensive watch, "I hate to eat and run, but I have a conference call with our Tokyo office in an hour. Emily, shall we discuss the expansion plans tomorrow?" I stood too, the check still clutched in my trembling hands. "Yes, let's do that." As we walked toward the door, I turned back to face my family one more time. They sat there like statues, faces frozen in various expressions of shock and shame. "Thanks for believing in my real job, family," I said quietly. "Thanks for all that support and encouragement. I couldn't have done it without you." The sarcasm hung in the air like smoke as Brandon and I walked out into the cool November night, leaving behind a table full of people who finally understood that success isn't always what it looks like on the outside. Sometimes it's a food truck. Sometimes it's a dream that everyone else calls foolish. And sometimes, just sometimes, it's exactly what you need it to be. Every now and then I catch myself wondering if I overreacted. Then I remember everything they put me through and think, nope, they had it coming. What's your take?